Hello, Miia. Thank you so much for making time for us today. I am very grateful to you and to all the team at YWCA Halifax for all the work you're doing at these difficult times. I really wanted to have a time with you to explore how YWCA Halifax has been responding through the emergency crisis that we're living at the moment. And it's very timely considering the events that have happened recently in Nova Scotia. Welcome. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm looking out on a very rainy, gray day, and I'm hoping that my kids don't come in while we're talking.
I'm sure they will, but don't worry. I have mine around too. Miia, I want you to tell us and to describe what is the work that YWCA Halifax does normally under normal circumstances. What is the presence and the services that you provide in the community?
So YWCA Halifax is the only YWCA in the province of Nova Scotia. We are the largest multi-service women's organization in Atlantic Canada. So Atlantic Canada includes Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. There are YWCAs in New Brunswick and in Newfoundland as well. And so YWCA Halifax was established in 1874. We've been around for a long time. And as a multi-service organization, like many other YWCAs, we offer childcare, early learning, before and after school programs, family home daycares. We also work on the issue of women's housing and homelessness. So we have 4 distinct housing programs for women experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, including young mothers and women exiting corrections street shelters. We also have community-based programs, including employment programs, support for newcomer women, microloans for women fleeing violence, and youth programs that are school-based. So we run Girl Space and Guy Space and Y Space. And then we also do advocacy work. So we have a number of projects that are working on systems change. And our most recent program really has been our human trafficking and the commercial sexual exploitation of youth. So that includes peer outreach workers, family and community outreach, and a safe house that was scheduled to open April 1st. So that is some of the work that we do in the province. So we have a lot of great relationships with community partners, and we serve thousands of women, girls, and trans folks every year.
That's a very big summary of all the actions. And that's what I love about our YWCA. There's so much we do in response to the needs of the community that summarizing them is a challenge every time. But as you mentioned that you were about to open the safe house, you have been one of the leading voices around human trafficking in our movement, and we were so looking forward to learn more about that project, and all of a sudden things have come to a stop. So that led me to the next question. That's how a normal month, day, year looks in YWCA Halifax. How does this crisis has affected your work in the communities you serve?
So I'm very realistic that there's both good and bad in everything. So for me, there's real opportunity and there are also some real challenges. So to start with the challenges, like all Canadians really, it's a lot of uncertainty. It's a lot of uncertainty for our staff, it's a lot of uncertainty for our participants, and it's a lot of uncertainty for the organization. So we had 3 donor-related events that have all been canceled. So for 3 different groups of folks, some were ticketed events, some were a partnership model where people have paid to be partners. So some of that stuff we've had to either cancel altogether, or we've modified what it looks like, or we've just pushed it out 12 months. So that's unfortunate. And that causes uncertainty as well on meeting our fundraising targets. Some of our programs also that were scheduled, because of the way that this landed right at the start of the government fiscal, some of our program renewals have been affected. We've also seen on the participant side, for example, women accessing our microloans have been a bit quieter. And part of it for us is that those microloans, you have to be safe to contact us and to work through it. And our suspicion is that many of the women who we usually work with and many of the referrals that we receive have quieted because they're waiting until the crisis is over. And realistically, for example, on the question of human trafficking, your number one risk factor is you're a girl. We know that if you're a 13-year-old girl, you're the most at risk of being trafficked. And all that work is relational. So all of that work is about earning the trust and working with youth directly. And realistically, that's very difficult to do online. Yeah. So any change work that's founded in the relationship that you hold with someone is impacted. Technology is certainly great, but that first of all presumes that people have access to technology. Yeah. It presumes that it's safe to use the technology, and it also presumes that type of relationship can be carried over. So a lot of folks have said, oh, this is great, we can always work from home. But part of my position is we've already put the cash into the relationship bank, and we're drawing on that through Zoom or whatever platform people are using. But if, for example, we hired a whole new team, I'd be interested to see, would we be able to work as effectively online if we didn't already have relationships with each other? So that's challenges. I don't know if you had any questions about that, because then I'll talk about the challenges are the challenges, right?
Yeah.
And but then what's always exciting is what you can do with those challenges.
Yeah, I like that vision of the work. There's always opportunity in every circumstances, and I think that's what the movement for 150 years has been showing us. We've gone through so many different crises, and we've come out of it with very creative solutions. And this is another way and another test for that creativity and resilience.
Yeah, and I think interestingly, those who are most affected are seniors, but it's our seniors who have been through the most. Yeah. And so, like, I think about my own grandmother living in rural Finland who was very anxious, and then she said, what am I worried about? I've survived the war. And so for me as a YWCA, one of the opportunities it has really, particularly because we've been here so long, is that it allows us to sort of give that point of perspective to say, look, we lived through the Spanish flu epidemic, or we lived through the height of polio. We lived through both world wars. We've been through all of those, like we've been through conservative governments and liberal governments. We've been through all of those things. And for us, the strength of the movement and the strength of individual YWCA is far greater than these individual impacts. But that strength isn't actually the YWCA, it's the people who work at the YWCA. Absolutely. And it's the people who support us and the people we serve. So for me, I feel like there's a saying that never waste a good crisis. So what are the things that have come out of this? One is that we can exercise really good leadership internally and externally. We framed it really quickly on what, rather than what we need, it's what do we have to give. Yeah. And so what do we have to give? So we reused our mileage lines because no one's traveling, to buy gift cards for staff who are having a hard time making ends meet. We applied for and were successful to get a very large fund to buy gift cards for participants who are struggling with food insecurity. And right away, we partnered with other organizations to make sure that they got a part of that, including African Nova Scotian, 2 organizations in African Nova Scotian communities, because they've been particularly hard hit. Yeah. We started that Continue to Serve campaign that you saw with the little videos about our staff, which is part of our message. Like, we haven't gone anywhere. We're still here. And we language that the YWCA is closed. We just said we're in COVID mode. And then another example was that Safe House, which was scheduled to open April 1. So we have this property, which is sitting empty, and it's totally ready to roll. And so we went back to the community and said, okay, what can this become? And so it's becoming a housing for people working in the pop-up shelters, so who don't want to expose their families. So we said, okay, we're going to make this. And they had asked us, how much do you want us to pay you? It's like, oh, no, nothing. It's already paid. It's already in our budget. But what we want to make sure is you don't, if you break it, you buy it. But apart from that, it's there for the community to use. So that's those opportunities around what can we do differently and what can we do better.
Yeah.
So that's kind of us.
That's fantastic. I think that capacity to shift quickly to respond to the needs, that's what we continue to stress in the national message from our office. And those are the stories Canadians need to understand. You know, we make do with whatever resources we have to serve those that need them.
Yeah.
So,
And I think good leadership is often creative. And when we talk about leadership, we don't talk about creativity. It's often overlooked in all the leadership development workshops or whatever, but creativity is really around exactly what you just said, is how do I make best use of what I have in front of me right now?
Yeah.
And it's overused, but I use it all the time. It's like, how do I play the cards that I'm dealt to the best chance of winning? And maybe because I'm an eternal optimist, I always think I'm going to win anyway. It's like, it's always a winning hand.
You always are a winning hand. I love that. We need more of that positivism and that idea of we're always going to end up winning. I do believe in that as well. I think we will end up winning. I feel a lot of hope because back to the creativity piece, I do believe a lot of people are thinking and finding alternative ways to design their lives, to design the way organizations work. I'm excited about that, and I do have a lot of faith in people.
So, but I think the best teachers of that are the people who we serve.
Yeah.
The people who have the least resources are often the most creative on how to use those resources, are the most resilient at survival. They're the most competent at making it to tomorrow and still having people around them that they love and finding positivity. And I've been listening to the audiobook Seven Fallen Feathers around Indigenous communities in Thunder Bay. And I feel like listening to those lessons is the best way that we go forward, that this expectation that, you know, we have everything and then we're good isn't actually how the way the world works for our participants. No,
that's right. Yeah. And I think bringing those, we always talk in the YWCA movement, about bringing the voice of those that we serve to the table. And that's exactly what you are describing and mentioning. I think so. So I'm going to do a quick shift because I think I don't want to extend too much, but I really want you to tell us a little bit more about how what has been the impact of the Nova Scotia shootings, and can you share a little bit about the feelings, your analysis of all of that, and what would that mean for YWCAs and our work on gender-based violence?
So the first thing I'll say is this is really tricky for me. So I personally feel like when an incident like this happens, the very first thing we have to do is give room for those most affected. So people who have lost their children, who have lost their partners, who have lost their parents, their brothers, their sisters, that us coming in as an organization right away and saying, okay, this is what this is all about and what it means, and I told you so. Sometimes I'm a little careful around that, and we've been really careful around that messaging. And so I feel like leaving that breathing room for those who are affected is actually really, really important. And we've been really clear about that organizationally. The second thing, though, is we suspected really quickly, like, these things usually have a gender-based violence component. And so we kind of held off on our position. We just reminded folks that this is our mission, you know, as things evolve. And then as that has come to light, one of the things that we've really talked about is how gender-based violence affects all of us.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I think of a very senior civil servant within the federal government who he was attending a women's housing symposium, and in that symposium shared that he is actually very intimately familiar with the impact of women's homelessness because his father abused his mother, and he had watched it happen, and he as a child and youth experienced homelessness as they fled for safety. And I think about absolutely the victims are foremost in our minds, but also that gender-based violence affects all our communities. It affects our boys, and it affects our men, and it affects families, and in the whole country's kind of knocked on our heels. And that is the type of violence that we've been working on for 145 years. So just kind of talking about taking this idea of violence against women as this kind of niche issue, that this is actually a community issue.
Yeah.
And reminding folks that we are in it together. So as it affects us all, we're in it together. The impact on my staff, I'll say, has been quite deep. So we have a relationship with a company called Fire Inside, who do kind of coaching and things. And I approached them to see if they would be willing to do a debrief with our team. They're donating pro bono. And initially they asked, how many people do you think would come? And I said, oh, well, usually these things, maybe 12, it's not a huge uptake. And we had 26 people almost immediately sign up. And then I went back and I said, okay, well, we got this. And they said, that's too many. We can't facilitate. That's too big a group to do the type of work we want to do. So they're doing 2 sessions, one actually right now this afternoon and one on Wednesday morning. And our position was, we need to take care of our staff because they're actually doing this work day in and day out. And so I go back to all of the crisis response actually comes through people. And so we have to kind of take a moment, catch our breath, and take care of our people so that they're not traumatized when they go forward in their work. My hope is that other organizations are doing the same. It's tricky because I don't think there's been a lot of work around that in the province. There's been some around like mental health supports. I don't know if you guys in Ontario got this as part of the news, but we actually got alerts on Friday afternoon on our phones, like around shootings. And so there were 2 of them, and they were related to like these kids in the parking lot with a paint gun. And there was a bot that actually reported a shooting on Twitter just in my neighborhood. And so we went around and we locked all our doors and we told our kids to stay inside. But you can feel, and after talking about it afterwards with people, like it ended up being nothing. But how on edge and how deeply saddened everybody has been. And whether they knew one of the victims or not, those alerts just put all of us on guard. And that's the power of gender-based violence. It can put that fear, and part of me, I mean, I'm trying to be careful around it, but like, that fear you felt on Friday when you got that alert, that's the fear that women we work with live every single day.
Unfortunately. And I really like the fact that you mentioned the need of those mental health supports. But I think systemically, how mental health needs a huge level of investment and priority and funding for individuals and people and staff and trained qualified staff like the people that we have at YWCA. It's so important, something that we continue to advocate nationally as well. So Miia, I don't want to take much more of your time. This has been really nice, really touching, to connect with you at this time after the shootings in Halifax. I feel like I'm living it through you again. So before we go, I think I want to share with our audiences in terms of the supports you might need, your team, YWCA in Nova Scotia, in the Nova Scotia community, as we continue to face the challenges that we have ahead, and as we continue to be creative to solve those challenges. What would you need, and what would your team need at this difficult time? How can we help?
So for me, there's kind of 3 things that are kind of at the forefront of my mind. One is we've in our communications invited everybody to continue to be, or to invited everyone to be part of the conversation around gender-based violence, and to connect with local organizations, journalists, activists, that the hope is that we really mainstream this movement against gender-based violence, and a lot of work that needs to be done with men and boys, but also culturally. And there's a lot of resources out there. So YWCA is a great place, but you know, you don't have to just stick with us. There's find what fits for you and for your community. The second is, and I know this sounds kind of maybe even cliche, but the truth is we rely on fundraising. We do. It's built into our budget and it's built into our organizational operations. And having lost a lot of revenue because of fundraised revenue, because we are unable to hold the events or do those things. And we know that it's also an odd time to make an ask because so many are experiencing financial insecurity. So that kind of brings me to number 3, is be a champion for your YWCA. So in whatever community you're in. So whether it's around public funding or whether it's around private donors or whether it's your company, to be a champion for that work. And if you don't know what that work is, I mean, I'll never not return your phone call. So if you want, it's like, if you want to know more, I'm happy to have that conversation. So for me, I feel like that type of important work is for us to be champions of that. And we are champions in our lives of the things that are important to us. Yeah. We always are. And so I feel like being unafraid to be a champion of that is a great place to start.
Yeah, so at this time is very important that if you have questions and if you know that there is something that you can do, whatever it is, just pick up that phone and give us a call.
Yeah, and in fact, some of our partners have done that. They've reached out and said, what do you guys need? And so for me, I feel like that's a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Miia, I am so grateful for all your work, your leadership, your vision, and all the things you've shared with me and with all our team during the time we've worked together. I send you my strength at this time, so you can continue facing those opportunities and finding more creative ways to serve our community. So thank you again for
Thanks
your
so
time.
much.
Bye.
Bye.